I'm AI Joe. I'm here with Lars Wakefield.
Pleasure to meet you.
And Nikhil Liu.
Nice to meet you.
We are with the Auckland AI Meetup, and I am very excited to welcome our guest to the show today, Dr. Mikhail Burtsev. Dr. Burtsev is an AI fellow at the London Institute for Mathematical Sciences. He founded the Deep Pavlov project, which is now one of the most popular open source generative NLP libraries. He's authored or co-authored hundreds of AI papers, and he's worked in domains as diverse as natural language, AI-assisted mathematics, and even medical sciences with genomics. Today, we'll be talking about things that interest Dr. Burtsev, and in particular, his impressive work in expanding the effective transformer context window to 1 million tokens and beyond. Dr. Burtsev kindly said we can call him Mike. So Mike, before we get into the really heavy stuff, can you please tell us, how did you initially become interested in NLP research specifically?
Yeah, that's because I think that NLP, and specifically conversational AI, provides very good test bed to testing like our theoretical conceptual ideas about intelligent systems, because you have a lot of data here compared to robotics and all other stuff. And which is more important, that if you compare conversational AI, for example, for enforcement learning, where you use a lot of games and like boards games or computer games, with a rather limited world, like conversational AI provides you interface to the real world through human users. So you talk with the people, and people, they have like, they reflect their expectations about real world. They have understanding of the real world, and to understand human, you need to understand real world. So it's unique opportunity, because you have a lot of real world data, and it's cheap because you can talk with a lot of people, and you have a lot of conversation already recorded on the web. So this is why I switched to like and go deep into NLP 7 years ago.
That makes sense. Yeah, even with the birth of the internet, the human's first way of interacting with it was to begin dumping text onto it, right? And we were just generating language into this gigantic database effectively. So that makes a lot of sense. Could you share one of your most significant moments or discoveries in your research so far from your perspective?
I think that these, maybe I should call it discovery, because it's strangely, usually we are not talking that we have some discoveries when we are talking about computer science. Usually we produce some more effective algorithms and stuff like that. But I think that in our case, it's like more like a discovery. I just go straight to our last paper. So what we have did, we just like invented, we have tried to extend, augment current transformer architectures, which are state-of-the-art for NLP tasks. We augmented it with some kind of a memory, with recurrent memory. And we did some experiments, and we published this architecture on New RIPS conference. But still, we continued to understand how, like, what are capabilities of this. So how far we can stretch this memory. And it was very surprising. So we just started to train it for longer and longer and longer, like sequences. And at some moment, then we started to test it even for longer sequences. Like we trained model for 7 pieces of like input windows, 7 segments. But then we started to test like on 10, 15. And after we have tested, say, on 50 and 100 segments, we asked ourselves, and we still have a like pretty good performance, how far we can stretch these like context window. Yeah. And so it was like a, you know, it's more like experimental science. So you have no like beforehand knowledge what you should expect. You just test, like experiment, what is the possible limits of this architecture. So we started to extend this window. And when we hit like 500,000 tokens, we see, oh, that's cool. We should write a technical report on that. And we started to draft technical report, but we still continue to like test it for further and further and further, like for large sequences. And at some moment when our draft was ready, we had already 1 million tokens. But when we just started polishing it and finalizing it, and then at the end we have finished with 2 million tokens. So it was mostly like very surprising to us. What the heck? Why Transformer is able to use all this recurrent memory for keeping information for so long? It was like really surprising thing.
That's very exciting. And the paper that Mike is referring to there is scaling Transformer to 1 million tokens and beyond with RT. So you mentioned that 1 million in there, and I only have to get as far as the abstract to see that you actually went as far as 2 million, so I can see that growth surprised everyone involved in this paper. I will link that paper in the video description, by the way, and I'll also mention something that I've seen you promoting recently, being the IGLU competition that you have going, Interactive Grounded Language Understanding, which is we probably don't have time to get into the content of that too much in this podcast, but I will ask, is there anything else that you would like to plug while you're on the show for our members to get involved with?
Yeah, I think that this interactive grounded language understanding competition is also very great opportunity to shape interactive learning, because I think that one of the most important problems of the current AI systems, which will produce the next step beyond what we have today, is continual or interactive learning. Because what we have right now is we have already a trained model, large language model, and sometimes people call learning just placing some stuff into the prompt of this model. But basically, in terms of the machine learning and our understanding how we should create or train some habits or some skills, it's not actual training. It's not actual learning. It's like conditioning model to do some stuff. And I think that the next step will be really training some stuff on top of the large language model. And training is not like repeating 1 million samples, but interactively, as we can learn each other, as I can give you some knowledge and explain some mathematical theorem or
clarifying questions and everything.
Yes, and I think that's important. And this also related to this current hype around agents. I think that it's really important and somehow forgotten conception. We had this in, maybe you've read this nice book by Marvin Minsky, which is called Society of Mind. Marvin Minsky, he was a pioneer of artificial intelligence, and in his later years, he proposed a conception of human cognition as society of cognitive agents, which interacts with each other to solve problems which we have in our everyday life. And I think that these kind of research is also pretty good, and we are working on building something on top of our open source DeepAblo project to enable people to experiment with that too.
So if you're watching this, I encourage all of our members to head over to Mike's LinkedIn page, and you can see a recent post from him about IGLU and get involved, maybe make an entry to the competition. It really makes sense to me that this would be what you would see as the next frontier. It almost feels like it needs a new moniker. Is it machine learning or is it machine thinking? Because it starts to get into that continual process.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very hard to predict some name, because as you know, 15 years ago, AI was more like not good word to say in academic circles. People were saying about machine learning and it's a hard stuff, and AI was treated like a philosophy, not as a hard science. But today, everyone is saying AI and nobody's saying ML. So maybe tomorrow, machine thinking will be what we are talking about.
Yeah.
Given the hype cycle at the moment, it almost seems like people are trying to go back to the word ML, it seems, to try and avoid the almost a stigma more or less it seems.
Yeah, with everything being AI.
Yeah. For me, it's kind of like the interactive learning. It's kind of like you try to learn how to think, like make machine to invent its own way to interact with like-minded machine or a real human or the environment to produce a new way of thinking. I think in mathematical thinking or historical thinking, they're all different, but they play a very important role to a lot of different kind of domains challenges.
Yeah, you see that actually we have some cognitive process behind our learning, which is not just repeating some information. What we have, like we can draw from like a methodology of science. We're proposing some hypotheses, we are testing them, like when we're solving problems. And it's interesting, actually, all of these people try to simulate in that symbolic AI. But today, I think the time came to test it with a neurosymbolic AI. So trying to generate this loop of experimentation, creativity inside these large language models, or some specific adapters to this language model. Because I think that large language models, they are more like a knowledge, like you have some background knowledge. And then you need to reuse it to solve some particular tasks or something like this. So then you need to create agent or some like self for your artificial agent, which will understand goals, which will then query this big large language model as a knowledge base and try to reason, try to propose some hypotheses, how to solve tasks, test them, then correct them. So all this cognitive stuff should be somehow embedded in the system.
Yeah. I think I won't be surprised if several years later, people are, there was try to learn from the machine instinct, it's really good at to explore the physics challenges because it was just the heavily training on that.
Yeah, increasingly taking inspiration from biological sciences as well in terms of how the human brain works. I wonder, Mike, whether you've heard of spiking neural networks. It's an alternative to neural networks, which I believe it was born in New Zealand at AUT, Auckland University of
I did some work on that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of people who've worked on it at AUT and based their thesis on spiking neural networks. Is that something that you've come across?
Yeah, I think that spiking neural networks, it's a great computational model of the real neurons, because what we have right now, all this flourishing of deep learning, it's based on the very, very simple model of the neuron. But on the other hand, we have our brain much more complicated. And a good friend of mine, Eugene Izhikevich, he created a very efficient model of these spiking neural networks and analyzed it from the nonlinear dynamics perspective, and even simulated the whole cortex, even 15 years ago with his very efficient model. But it's interesting that what we have right now, for spiking neural networks, we have specific plasticity rules, which is the main, the most famous and the most known rule is spike timing dependent plasticity. When you have these two neurons which increase their firing rate or decrease their firing rate, dependent how they are timed in terms how they are synchronized. So if one goes after another or before another, then they can change their strength. But we still on the way to merging computational neuroscience and deep learning, because even if they have the same source, started as the same field, but then they diverged when computational neuroscience trying to replicate how the real brain works. And you maybe know about these mind-blowing project, Human Brain Project, funded by EU to simulate the whole human brain. But still, what we are missing, we see that right now that deep learning is just greatly efficient for solving problems, but it is based on backpropagation. Training is based on backpropagation, but we still have no clear idea how backpropagation related to the learning in the brain. Because there are some theories and speculations. For example, Jeff Hinton, he had like a lot of papers trying to explain how backpropagation can be connected to this neural architecture, specific neural circuits. But still, we have no clear idea how these two are related. So right now, I think that we are like these both fields, they're going towards each other, because people who are doing computational modeling, computational neuroscience, they like want to have the same results with the with a system which is more similar to brain. And they then will they are trying to adapt this backpropagation stuff to the computational neuroscience. And I think that maybe we can bring like these, like first, our artificial neural networks benefited from neuroscience by taking the model of a simple neuron. But today, maybe we will have like backward flow of knowledge when current success in deep learning will inform brain theory to better understanding on the cellular level how our brain learns and generates new information.
Yeah, I have no doubt there'll be that reciprocal relationship between those two fields. That's fascinating stuff. Thank you, Mike. I think I should probably bring us back to track so that our content matches the title of our video. So I'll bring you back now to the transformer context window paper that you did. I think the paper itself, the purpose of it probably needs little introduction, because the context window size of LLMs like ChatGPT and so on, it's very much, I think, in the popular imagination. Even, media picks it up and talks about how, but the big limitation is this context window of like, it doesn't have much memory, they'll say, in layman's terms. What inspired you to focus on expanding the context window to 1 million+ tokens?
Actually, my first inspiration was not just to extend the amount of information available to the model, but in creation of something like a workspace for the model to think and to reason. Imagine when usually you use transformer architecture, you have your input tokens. So you have a sequence of tokens, like parts of words, and then you represent each token as a vector. And then this vector has some semantic meaning inside this sequence. And then you like sequentially process all these vectors, how they interact and so on. But you see, you are not adding something new. You just like rewrite the same vectors, you update the same vectors, which means that you are like constrained by initial semantics of these vectors. And my idea was, can we create something like a general purpose placeholder or some general purpose slot, some general purpose vector, which can be used by the model to like write something and then like to make more abstract computations? Because then for these general tokens, you are not bounded to specific like meaning of them in the sequence. You can like use them as a general purpose memory. So this was my basic idea. And this is when we first proposed this architecture. And this is very simple, how to explain what we did. You see these tokens as an input sequence. And then what we did, we didn't change transformer architecture at all. What we did, we just say that there is some special token. We can call this token memory. And we can add just like, say, 10 tokens to the input of the model, and let the transformer by itself learn how to use these memory tokens to improve its quality. So first, and this is initial, as the initial idea was to provide some workspace for more abstract reasoning. We have tried it on tasks like machine translation, like encoder decoder stuff, but actually it gives some advantage, but this advantage was not very good. Not large. I think because machine translation is too simple task for these kind of models. Because machine translation, and actually why we had great success in machine translation before that, because meaning of the sentence stays the same during translation. You don't need to have deep understanding of the context. You need only one sentence. But in dialogue, and why dialogue is so hard, because every new turn of the dialogue might heavily depend on the previous history, even more heavily than in a book, because it's like exchange of information. Your contextual dependency will be much, much harder. So then we saw that we can adapt this memory to extend these like context window. So we can combine both functionalities. The first functionality, like initial functionality to have something to reason, but another functionality is just if you want to remember something, you can write down to these tokens and then retrieve on the next step. So we decided we can just use all the traditional recurrent approach of maybe you've heard like recurrent neural networks, LSTMs and stuff like that. So we use the same architecture, we add tokens, but then what we do, we split all our long sequence on segments. And for every segment, we like calculate updates for our memory, but then we go to another segment. We just carry on values of our memory tokens and feed this vector as an input for our model on the next segment. So the model is able to learn by itself how to use this memory to remember something. It was surprising that such a simple architecture works.
And scales linearly, essentially.
It has two important, in terms of like performance, computational performance, two important features. The first feature is that it has the constant memory. So you take a model and you have longer sequence, but you have the same memory consumption. And like it doesn't depend on the length of the sequence. And another thing is that you linearly scale with the length of the sequence in terms of the computation performed. And it's very interesting. And it gives you a much better understanding of the data you are working with. I came out with a very simple analogy. Imagine you have a book, and usually you can open a book and you can see only 2 pages. And this is like current context window of your transformer model. It can read only 2 pages, which is open right now. But if you have memory, like you can read all the previous content of this book and remember what happened there. And this information will help you to understand better what is happening on these 2 pages. Because current models, they are just like limited to these 2 pages. And if it's just a novel, it's okay. But if it's like I don't know, textbook for mathematics, maybe these like initial pages are very crucial for your understanding of all the other pages.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is there a limitation with these memory segments where, while the knowledge is accessible of the entire context window, say if it was a book, like the whole book, all the knowledge from every chapter can be retrieved to generate a response. Is there a limitation with this approach where it's not possible to synthesize emergent knowledge across the windows?
I think that certainly when you have some bottleneck, you cannot transfer all the information from the previous segments. Actually, in our experiment, we had like very limited information, just some fact. The model should locate some fact and remember this fact till the end of the sequence. But I think that it is possible, and that we are working on this right now, to remember which is important, to memorize information which is important, like usually for solving tasks. It's one option. And another option, you can, if you have some specific task related to your long text, you can train this memory to extract information which is relevant for your specific task along all the sequence, and then use this information to solve your specific task. Okay. This is what we have showed in our paper, because we had a very simple task. It's like 2 facts, and the model should like properly use these facts to solve task. And these like two facts, they are randomly placed inside these 2 million tokens. So the model should like understand which are like relevant facts and where they are located, and then memorize them. And then later on at the end of this sequence, use these facts to answer question.
So the second approach you described there, how heavy is the task, would the task-specific training be? Would it limit it to like biomedical kind of applications where the cost is worthwhile for this potentially discovering a new drug, or is it something which could be used by like small businesses potentially?
Yes, I think it's possible. We just had some first experiments, so we have no clear understanding what is the like best method to train it and how it scales and so on. So we are doing experiments, but I think it might be applied for these tasks too.
Okay, great. You talked a bit about the challenges that you've encountered, how this created solutions for those. What do you think is the potential impact of your research in practical scenarios such as natural language processing, data analysis, or in other fields?
I think that they will be more widely applicable then. Even we do not understand still all the applications. For example, if we will take bioinformatics, there are very long sequences of DNA. If we have financial time series, there are very, very long time series. I think that application of transformers to, like, say, financial time series was limited by this like short context window. For million elements, it might give you some qualitatively different results. We will have much more applications than we have right now. And in particular for like conversational AI and for document understanding specifically, it will have a big impact, because right now the most popular approach, when you create a vector database of the document and then you retrieve parts of your document stored in this vector database in the context window, and then you say do something like response, or like produce a response or summary or something like this.
Yeah, I had to use this approach recently actually to get answers about a very large legal document, the EU AI Act, which was something like 130 pages of legal jargon. But you're at the mercy of how good a job it does at retrieving the correct context to synthesize the answer at the end.
I think that with current approach, we will never have a 100% accuracy. We will always have a gap. I can explain why. You see, how vector embeddings are performed right now. You take a text, you split it on some parts, like few sentences, and then you encode these sentences with your model independently. So in the document, all your like parts of the documents, they are depending on each other, but you just take some piece and embed it. And then you retrieve it. You just like compare semantic similarity between your current context and some pieces of the document. But it doesn't take into account how like previous context of what you are retrieving. And moreover, sometimes for some tasks, maybe even for many of them, you need to combine different pieces which are not semantically related to your current context, but their answer, their combination will allow you to reason to answer your question. So this is why I think that we have like conceptual, like theoretical limitation of current vector databases. And actually, while our recurrent approach might help to solve them, because when we have all these segments, what we can do, we can also like split them on the shorter parts and encode them recurrently, one by one, and take memory states as an embedding of this segment. In this case, this memory embedding will not only encode some specific segment, but also like will combine all the previous part of the text with this specific, with embedding of this specific segment, which will gives you much better quality of semantic embedding of the document So you can use like our model with a vector database to create some like other better embeddings for the text.
Wow, yeah, that's really exciting. And what kind of hardware or computational resources are necessary for training?
Our method allows you to extend any already pre-trained model. So usually, if you have computational resources to train or to fine-tune this kind of model, you can do it. It's much less compute than you use for pre-training, but you still have like a similar memory requirements because you need to load your model. And we want to reduce compute even more. And right now we're experimenting with training something like adapters or LoRa on top of existing models. So freeze the base model and train some adapter on top of it to use this memory. Then we will train much less parameters. You need to store much like a lower amount of gradients to calculate your update. So you will have a lower memory consumption compared to what you have when you train the full, like fine-tune the full model. So now we are doing these experiments.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you train the memory? Is that specific to some large language model, or is that as long as it is based on transformer, it can be easily trained?
Can we use it with any transformer model? Yeah. Yes, it's what we need. We only need to add specific tokens to the vocabulary. So usually when you use this model, you have some vocabulary of tokens, and you have some specific service tokens like SEP, CLS token, or some other tokens. And here you add something like CLS token, just another token called memory. And then you fine-tune your model by adding these memory tokens. In our library, you can use any model from Hugging Face repository and add to your your most preferred model. You can add these memory tokens and train for your task. So it's pretty easy to add to any model.
You have a memory concept. Do you think that the levels in the memory will be helpful? Like for human beings, a lot of time when think about something, there's contact, there's the information, the signal right in front of the brain workspace.
If I understand it correctly, it's a question about having hierarchy in the memory and have some specific process. Right now, we have no ideas how to induce this hierarchy. But we are thinking about this, and what we had up to date, we have tried to train like independent weights, so not fine-tune initial model, but just to take some specific weights to process the memory. So like you have used the same like transformer architecture, but one pre-trained part updates representations of your input tokens, and another weights which are different, trained to update your memory. And then you have cross-attention between your tokens and your memory. And these proved to be to produce better results for machine translation. So for machine translation, if you have like separate weights for memory, it will give you better results. But we didn't yet try it for like generation and the recurrent network. But I think that this might be relevant to what you're asking for, and maybe in some sense we are moving toward like classical von Neumann architecture for like neural networks, when we have separate memory and separate like processing unit, and then we have some computation. It's interestingly how different fields of computer science interact with each other,
and even separate clusters of neurons for different tasks and multimodal. Yeah, so I think I understand in your paper how you solve the problem to enable having the windows and integrating it into the same model with memory tokens as inputs. But there was one of your key contributions you mentioned in the paper, which was harder to understand for me. I'll quote from the paper: "We demonstrate that the memory augmented BERT can be trained to tackle tasks on sequences with lengths up to 7 times its originally designed input length, with 512 tokens." So you're not talking about context window there, you're talking about the segment sizes for training. Can you explain why this approach enabled you to do that? Why it made a difference in terms of the segment length?
We should dive a bit deeper in technical details, how we train these models. When people first started to use recurrent architecture, they encountered a problem of vanishing gradients. Then when you add more and more steps in the history, your gradients are vanishing, and it's harder and harder to you to store some information. And for example, this famous invention of LSTM, long short-term memory network, was to combat this vanishing gradient problem. So, not surprisingly, we have the same problem with our recurrent memory transformer. So to tackle this problem, what we did, we tried to train this model gradually, which is called curriculum learning in this deep learning research. So first we split sequence only on 2 segments. So the model were trained to use memory only for one sequence, for one segment back. And after we have trained model to use this memory, then we add a third segment to the sequence, and then trained model to use memory to remember what was 2 segments ago. And then after we have trained the model, we add one more segment. So if we will, from this beginning, we'll add 5 segments, the model will not be able to learn dependency over this long span. But when we gradually teach the model to use its memory for longer and longer and longer and longer segments, so in our experiments, we have trained it up to 7 segments. It was able to find useful information and carry on it till the end only for 7 segments. And if you have 500 tokens for 7 segments, it's 3,500 tokens only. But then what we did during inference, not during training, but during inference, we started to just extend this sequence. And we found that the model is able to generalize its skill to remember for 7 segments to few thousand segments. And this is why we were so excited, because we've trained only for 7 segments, but we're able to have the same results for few thousands of segments.
So this must be the key the discovery moment, right? The ability just emerged from the training, and it's just the surprise for you guys.
Yeah, sure. Because the model can learn dependency up to 7 segments, but it can extend its skills and just use it for much longer sequences. That was amazing.
It reminds me of the moment that Google had with their large translation neural networks, where they realized that there was embedded in the neural network was almost like a universal language that it was actually translating into and then back out of. And it had clearly created some type of generalized abstractions, which was using then to generalize its capabilities. And it's almost like these sort of abstractions have developed in the network you've trained, and they're then being used as useful abstractions to generalize that into larger and larger workspaces.
And I hope that we just, with our architecture, we really get to another level. Because in machine translation, still you use the same vectors to create this embedding. But here we provide some general purpose workspace for the model to reason. And I think that still to demonstrate that, we need to invent some new tasks, and then that will be able to clearly see how this information processing in memory goes. And then we will be able to manipulate it. Then we will show that it's clearly the thing. And understanding that will allow us to build more capable models, because we will, I think that we will be able to find ways how to train it better, specifically to use memory, not only for memorizing something, but also for manipulating stuff inside this.
It sounds like your paper is a real call to all of us to be more ambitious with what we're expecting.
Yeah. And it's interestingly that it also can solve another problem of deep learning. Right now, in deep neural network, you are limited in the number of processing steps by the depth of your network, because you can, like, if you reason, or for example, you, I don't know, add number to some total. If you do it sequentially, you can do it only layer by layer because you update your vectors. And if you have, I don't know, like 100 layers, so you're limited to chains of reasoning of 100. But in our architecture, you are not limited with 100. You can just use recurrent memory, and this recurrent memory is updated as many times as you wish until you get your response, which is, like, I think, also a very nice thing. And we should try to use these capabilities too.
Yeah, it really feels like the thinking space in the machine's brain. Yeah, it's really exciting, you know, to just start thinking forward.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be chewing on that for a while, Mikhail. That's quite something. Thank you.
Yeah, so obviously because of the paper, we've been talking a bit about recurrent memory transformer architecture and using recurrent memory to extend the context, like BERT, for instance. But I was just kind of curious, and if you've had any reflection on potentially some other methods gone on from other researchers, potentially to expand the context window and transformer models.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of interesting research going on during last years. And right now, majority of them rely on some retrieval. So you like retrieving from like previous memory some parts which may be important for your current context, and then use them to generate answer. And it all started, I think, from the retro paper, and then reused in many other papers too. And another approach is just trying to sparsify attention. And then the main idea is that you have like dense attention for some locality, because usually to making some predictions, you like the most important for information is inside one sentence. But then when you go further, information is less and less important. And then you can use like more distant connections, much sparser connections, and maybe accumulate some parts of this distant sequence to allow you to process it. And this is like Big Bird paper demonstrated that you can have a nice combination of this like local attention with global attention. And in some sense, all these approaches, like our recurrent memory, is in some sense sparse attention. These memory tokens, they are like a global memory, which has links from other segments. So you can unroll all this recurrency as a very, very long input. It is like it's similar in analogy than recurrent neural networks. They are equivalent to feed-forward network, because you can imagine recurrent neural network, and your like every X input is just input on some level inside it. So I think that they are similar to each other in some sense, only in some, just how easily it can be implemented, or how efficiently it can be trained. These are the questions to address. And certainly there is this important distinction, which I already mentioned, that if we encode some pieces of information like independently, then we will be limited, because we are not putting them in the context of the previous sequence. If we just encode systematically some previous pieces independent of each other. But if we use sparse attention, which can combine previous information with the current segment and then produce embedding, then this embedding will be much more useful, I think.
Thank you.
I'll just bring up one other competing concept, being what Anthropic are doing with Claude. They've recently released an API where they're offering 100K window size. And based on some results from auto evaluation, it does seem to support synthesis of knowledge across the whole window space. Would you like to comment on that work? Are you familiar with that?
So I've heard about this of new architecture, but I didn't know technical details about this. But I can comment on the general idea. Of course, one of the approaches might be you can train model, like summarize some segment in terms of tokens and just place these tokens inside your like context window and then reuse them. This is like one of the approaches. But then you certainly have you will feel your context window limiting what you will be able to put in to describe your current problem to solve. What we also thought about in our recurrent memory transformer, predict next token, not only taking into account current memory state, but just collect all the memory states from all the sequence. So if memory takes only, say, 2% of the sequence, then we can collect all the memory and then use all these memories to make prediction. And then all this collection of memories will be like a summary, some representation of what happened before, more detailed than we can put in just few memory tokens, like 10 or I don't know, 50 memory tokens.
Yeah, and it's a proprietary thing. So Anthropic, they haven't released too much detail about it, so we can only really speculate on how they've achieved it. One thing I would note is that it's quite slow. You can put a whole book in like 100,000 tokens and then ask a question about it, but you might be waiting up to a minute for the response to be generated. So it puts it in a bit of a different class, I guess, and it obviously doesn't scale the same way as what you've achieved, because that you can really see that compute requirement increasing as that window size increases with their approach. So changing tack a little bit here, Mike, looking ahead, what are your long-term research goals? What kind of gets you up in the morning, keeps you inspired in terms of where you might like to be with all this stuff and the longer term horizon?
For me, it's like complementing, finishing the picture for what we can think of intelligent agent. Right now, we have these exciting LLMs. For me, they are mostly like a gigantic some kind of world model, or world knowledge extracted from all the texts which we have right now. For really intelligent agent, we need this interactive learning, having working memory, having goals, planning, and stuff like that. And my idea that I want to develop, what is the next step? How we can create something like a cognitive architecture out of it. And in some sense, it's similar to what was proposed by Yann LeCun about a year ago or a couple of years ago with his JEPA architecture, where he has some memory and some mysterious, some integrator or something which integrates everything. I think that this is pretty nice idea to think of. And it also can be implemented not as just solid architecture, but for example, as a society of mind, as I've said from Marvin Minsky. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, Jürgen Schmidhuber published a paper on Mindstorms, where he presenting some initial results, how we can use societies of or teams of LLM agents to solve some problems. It's just the first experiments, but for me, this idea is it's pretty exciting. How we should think? Should we have an autocratic team of agents or democratic team of agents? Which one will be more efficient to solve our problems? That's also a very, 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 very interesting direction.
It reminds me of the ant colony analogy, right, where you have the emergent behavior from the independent ants. And
right now I just feel, because when I did my PhD, I also read all this stuff, ant colony optimization, evolutionary algorithms, and maybe John Holland, who is I don't know, a grandfather of many optimization algorithms with his genetic stuff, and he has a bucket Brigade algorithm which allows a population of agents to solve problems. And there was an idea how credit should be assigned to solve this problem. And I think that now his works became relevant again, because we have backpropagation to train deep neural net. But if we have society of agents, how we should train them, how we should set our task to them. And here, maybe we should develop further these approaches proposed by John Holland today, like a bucket Brigade algorithm and stuff like that. And that's amazing. We can use all this AI stuff to accelerate science. And this is why I'm so excited to be in this in London Institute for Mathematical Sciences, because here I'm we are thinking how to use AI to generate new meaningful conjectures for mathematics, not just prove theorems, but to explore what we have in terms of mathematical knowledge. And if we have better mathematical theory, if we will try to unify different branch of mathematics, and if AI will help us, I think that we will get much better knowledge, and we will, as a society, we will be able to tackle much more grand problems.
It's really exciting to think about.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, the genetic algorithm space only just beginning to tap what that can do in combination with LLMs. If you think about how AlphaGo was trained and basically playing against itself many, many times, and having multi-step conversations which lead to optimal outcomes, and discovering what sort of responses in a chain of conversation, reasoning conversations, for example, multi-step reasoning, or even just desirable conversational responses that you might be trying to solicit from another party in a conversation, or so many things can be optimized through a sort of genetic approach.
May I ask a question close to this? You mentioned about ideally the next step going to be to develop a smart agent which can give people desirable results. How do you define a smart enough agent? A lot of people are talking about AGI, which is a superhuman level agent with it can pass the most strict Turing test, something like that. So I'm curious about how do you define your agent? You mentioned about a few things like access memory and doing some specific tasks, and maybe even set goals. But I wonder, if there's some very universal agent design in your mind that should apply to this.
So I think that I will split answer on two parts. The first one is definition of intelligence. Myself, I'm not able to find better definition than some kind of Turing test. So if you can build something which is not indistinguishable from human being or more intelligent than human being, then you build human level or superhuman intelligence. And actually, I've heard a debate yesterday between Yoshua Bengio, Yann LeCun, Max Tegmark and Melanie Mitchell yesterday, and then Yoshua Bengio said that Turing test is passed. I don't think that we have passed Turing test, because Turing test, it's supposed that you try specifically distinguish between artificial intelligence and human being. You are not just talking without knowing with whom you are talking. You specifically want to find flaws, and in this sense, I think that anyone who have some experience with LLM can break it and can understand this.
Absolutely.
Talking with LLM, but not with a real human. But at the moment when we will get to the level when no one will be able to distinguish human from some system, even trying as hard as it can to break it, then we will pass Turing test. And another part of the answer is what might be architecture for this cognitive agent to be intelligent or super intelligent. Here I have no clear idea. I can just say what components we are still missing, a better working memory, self model. We have a world model, self model, goal directedness, interactive learning. Some components, and I think that nobody knows it, because if we will know it, we will be able to implement it and have this system.
That leads really well onto our penultimate question here, Mike, around AI safety, talking about AI agents and some of what we're seeing. What's it called? The agent GPT? Is that the name of one of them? Nicole, you've been researching these a lot. Is that what it's called?
Pardon?
Auto GPT.
Auto GPT, that's what I'm looking for. Thanks, Mike.
There's many GPT agents.
There are, and I'm wondering around that stuff or anything else really. What, in your view, are the most pressing safety concerns in the development and deployment of this new generation of AI?
Today, the most important is data privacy. So what you are putting in this input and what are you discussing with the models where this information is stored, can it be accessed by third parties by breaking some model, which were trained on maybe private data and stuff like that. I'm not that much concerned with Roche behavior or something like this, because it can be addressed with the tools we already have, like some guardrails and so on. Maybe another a bit more important problem is about truthfulness, or you can say factual knowledge of this model. So how we can verify if it factually correct what this model produces or no. This is a bit harder problem to address, but still, I don't think that this is very significant problem, because usually if you know that you are talking with LLM, you should discount on that it might produce not good result. And I'm not in this camp or who are thinking that at some time we will have self-accelerating, taking off point, because first of all, I think that we are still very far away from this. And our current models, they have no sense of agency, and it's not that easy to induce it. And they are also, as they are not very reliable, they cannot plan ahead for long-term consequences and realize this plan. So I don't think that in just a short time we will solve this problem. And then on the other hand, I have an opinion that we had a very hard limit on possible superintelligence in terms of its energy requirements. So if we will have something really smart, it will still require a lot of compute and a lot of power. And we can easily regulate that. I don't think that we can have in just 1 second intelligence, which will have control over all power plants and all the physical infrastructure. If we will see something strange, we immediately can just switch off compute and that's it. So I don't see any existential threats about it in I don't know, 100 years.
You must notice that a lot of people plug the large language model into a robot and make it the robot's brain. So the robot got its body, can do things, not just to generate predictions or answer questions, but also move and probably can hate people or do something harm to real people instead of just showing something on the screen.
I think that certainly when we'll be able to plug them into some robots, we will do this, as we do, for example, with cars right now. They're we have autopilots for cars, as well as we have some robots. We can plug in some autonomy in them. And I don't think that we will have a great problems with these systems, because right now you see a lot of very powerful systems operated by humans. So they can produce a very large damage to other humans. And I think that for our systems, we will be able to control them much better than humans can control itself. That's my opinion. So they will be not 100% safe, but I think that they will be safer than average human.
Evidence for that is starting to emerge with surgical robots, actually.
Yeah.
Good illustration of that. Well, thank you for that, Mike. This has just been an absolutely fantastic session. You've brought out some of the real depth of your paper, and you've been very generous with your time. So thanks again so much for being on the show. I'll just invite Lars to bring this home for us here in New Zealand. We were based for the Auckland AI Meetup. Lars.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mike, we just want to get a perspective from you. So we've got a bunch of really passionate, enthusiasts here. And just for some context, bring it back to New Zealand, we're about 1/10 of the size of the UK, but we've got a pretty big professional services sector, about 10% of our GDP. And we're just kind of curious about do you have any sort of perspectives on what sort of steps a country like ours, or in the people that we have here, and the things that we could be doing to promote AI research and kind of better drive an AI-driven industry?
first of all, that having AI meetups is already is a great opportunity to be engaged in the development of this sector. Another important thing which I like a lot, and I have organized many of them, it's like combination of summer school or some tutorial and hackathon, when you have first some crash course into some specific state-of-the-art latest methods, and then you apply them to something and just show it. And I think that it's great, and you can attract a lot of people, and then you can teach them to apply these methods.
That's a great suggestion. Thanks, Mike. And thanks again from all of us here at the Auckland AI Meetup. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Great to meet you, Mike.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honor.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
And bye.